So, the weather conditions in Brazil this past weekend were extremely challenging to say the least. We had qualifying called off on Saturday afternoon and it was replaced with a qualifying session on Sunday morning. But despite that, we had 5 red flags during qualifying and also a stoppage during the race as well for severe weather, and just the danger really there. Anybody who's seen the onboards of some of the drivers on those last few laps before the red flags came out, before the safety car came out to slow the pack down, will know how dangerous it is. But despite that, some people are saying, apparently, that complaining about the conditions is laughable in itself. Let's have a look at this article, guys. Full article over on the F1Chronicle.com. Let's see who's saying that the weather probably wasn't as bad as what people are making out, because that's what that headline alludes to anyway. A motor racing legend has slammed laughable complaints that the conditions at the Brazilian Grand Prix were too dangerous to racing. As he filled in for the ill Kevin Magnussen at Haas, rookie Ollie Bearman radioed his engineer and declared, "Come on, talk to the FIA, this is really dangerous. I'm trying not to die." Strong words. Even the much more experienced George Russell, a senior director at the Grand Prix Drivers Association, the GPDA, also accused the governing body of caring more about the action for the television rather than the dangerous rainy conditions. He said, "I was shocked. I couldn't even keep my foot on the throttle on the straight. I guess the FIA likes action." Hans-Joachim Stuck, who entered over 80 Grand Prix in the 1970s, described the complaints as laughable. "Are they racing drivers or not?" the 73-year-old German said. Also a 2-time Le Mans winner and son of pre-World War II racer Hans Stuck told Eurosport, "Do they only want to drive in perfect conditions? All you have to do is take your foot off the gas and master the situation. This isn't a drive along Kurfürstendamm to have a coffee." Sounds like a nice easy drive. Stuck also hit out at the way the FIA postponed qualifying on Saturday due to torrential weather. "It would have given those people who aren't in the best car another chance to prove themselves," he said. "On the one hand, safety is of course paramount, but on the other hand, the best racing drivers in the world are in those cars. If it's slippery in one place, you just have to take your foot off the gas." There's no denying, however, that the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend hosted a spate of spins and crashes, also blamed on Pirelli's wet weather tyres and the bumpy, oily new track surface. "Sometimes they were just simple driving errors," Stuck insisted. "For me, incidents like that show that they are pushing themselves to the limit with these cars. It's a ride on a razor's edge. I think it's great that drivers are pushing themselves to the limit." Interesting comments from Stuck there. A lot to unpack with that. So, oh boy. Right, so basically, my thoughts on this are, there's a lot of different factors with this. I think the biggest factor behind the race being so dangerous, being so tricky, is because of the resurfacing. I think that is the biggest problem of them all here. They obviously resurfaced the Interlagos circuit between the last race in 2023 and this new race in 2024, but everybody was complaining about it. I mean, you had Fernando Alonso complaining that, his back was hurting, and that might have been to do with the Aston Martin being hastily rebuilt, but given the fact that his teammate went off on the formation, I'm wagering that the surface of the track was not agreeing with that Aston Martin, and a lot of other cars were really struggling too because of it. So if you could imagine your car's on a bumpy surface and with a low grip surface as well that has got a lot of water on it, it's a really bad combination. So that's really going to hinder you. So I feel like that is part of it. Now, Stuck is from the 70s when it comes to his racing career, and back then things were a lot different. You go and watch the Japanese Grand Prix of 1976, and that would never ever be run nowadays. And rightfully so. And in fact, before anybody says it, they just got on with it back then. They didn't, or not all of them did anyway. I believe Carlos Pache and most notably Niki Lauda withdrew from the race because they were too afraid to continue. They didn't like the conditions, they feared for their lives, and rightfully so, because in those days, as Lauda knew all too well, you could easily get a severe injury in a Formula 1 car, if not pass away as well. So we've moved on a lot from that. Now, again, it's hard with not being a racing driver myself, but what Stuck says is probably correct in a sense that the way to get around these corners is just lift off the throttle and hope for the best, but they shouldn't have to really do that. And the biggest thing for me is the visibility. Now, again, in Stuck's day, the cars were a lot different. The aerodynamics were a lot more simple, and mechanical grip made up the majority of what is the actual grip of the car. Nowadays, it's mostly generated from the downforce of the car, the aerodynamics. That's where most of your grip actually comes from. So to be fast in a Formula 1 car now, you have to be extremely fast around corners. You have to be on the edge of adhesion. Like he hinted to there, they're always driving on the edge. Back then, it was probably more of a kind of hope and feel sort of situation where you could kind of guess things into the corner and usually get them right just based on your own experience. In the wet in Formula 1 nowadays, you can of course call on your experience, and that's an important part to it, but I also think that it's quite difficult to say with any certainty, and if you get it wrong, you're flying off the road at an incredible speed. So I think they were right to do what they did at the end of the day. What I would say, and this is a legitimate argument some people have, some people are saying, well, Franco Colapinto only crashed because they were under safety car. And without seeing the incident myself, other than the aftermath, I can't say. But I feel like at that point they had no choice but to red flag the race. There was no other option at that point because the racetrack had debris over it and there was no visibility. If there's no visibility, you can't go racing in it. And some people might say, oh, why didn't they put the wet tyres on? But that would have just made the visibility even worse, actually, because then you're clearing more water that's getting thrown up into the sky, so the visibility actually does get worse, even though you have more grip. But what's use in more grip if you can't see where you're going? It's scary. It's scary. And there's a reason why we don't go racing in those conditions. Wet weather running is fine. You know, we've seen that in Canada. That was absolutely fine. But there are times when it is too wet. Now, there are also times as well when the FIA is a bit too cautious on things. I mean, Monaco a couple of years ago, I remember them being really overcautious about going racing there. There have been examples where I think the FIA could have easily been more brave, essentially, when it comes to that. You know, I really think they could have done a better job with it. But to be honest, in Brazil, I think they did an alright job. It's very difficult, and it was a really difficult weekend in general for the weather. It was really affected by it quite heavily. So I have to say, overall, I disagree with Stuck, because there's a reason why so many people back then passed away, because the racing was so dangerous. And I know that danger is always going to be a factor nowadays, but when you're literally not able to see. And some people say, oh, Ollie Bearman, you know, he's been a real whiny baby this week, and I thought he was a good driver. The kid was competing in his third Grand Prix ever. He was only going to, you know, he wasn't meant to be racing this weekend in F1 at all. He was called up at the last minute. And on top of that as well, it's his first time racing in rain conditions like that in Formula 1, which is very different to doing it in F2 and F3, where they're even more cautious about the weather, really, because these are young kids at the end of the day. They're a lot less experienced. So I think Bearman was just genuinely afraid. You have to realise, what is he, like 18, 19 years old, something like that? He's a boy. And he's going and doing something that most grown adults would literally wet themselves at trying to even attempt, you know. I can't imagine how scary doing something like that in the wet weather is. So I absolutely feel for the guy. I feel like it was just a genuine raw emotion. But anyway, that's my thoughts on it, guys. I think F1 for the most part got it right in Brazil. I really do. And whether they could have competed in Saturday qualifying, it's impossible to say just looking at the track, but it didn't look good. It didn't look good. So I understand their apprehension about it, because even when they got underway on Sunday morning in what were better conditions, more dry conditions, we had 5 red flags in qualifying. So that tells you how difficult this track was this weekend. And the resurfacing is probably the biggest factor in it all. But what is your guys' thoughts? Let us know in the comments below, as always, guys. And yeah, for much more F1 news and reviews and analysis and everything in between, keep it tuned here to the F1Chronicle.com. Like, share, comment, subscribe, ring the bell as well. And we'll see you very soon. Have a good one.